Hello, fellow gremlins. This is it. Finally here. I'm doing it. First YouTube video. Profitability in the gaming industry. You guys voted for this, and I'm giving it to you. Sorry it took so long, but I'm only one man, so please bear with me. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right into it. Just real quick, a quick intro. For those of you who don't know me, my name is the Sarukage. Well, at least that's the name I go by here. I am an IT consultant. I've been doing IT work for quite a bit of my life. Professionally speaking, I've been doing it for just over 15 years now, give or take. That's a rough estimate. Doesn't matter. More than a decade. And I started all the way at the bottom of just their average help desk guy and worked all the way up to system administration. And then I went independent because I wanted to help everybody. And I did not want to do it the way some guy in the C-suite thinks it should be done. I want to take my actual experience and knowledge and help people do things the right way the first time, so to speak. I'm also a game designer and a game developer. Formed an indie game development studio called Locked Door Studios with 6 other partners. And we've been designing and developing games off and on during our free time for quite a bit now. We're trying our best to dedicate more time to it, but as we can't quit our day job, that might lead into why most of you have not heard of us. But don't worry, one day you will.
And you are?
So that's a quick intro on who I am. This video that I'm making, I'm hoping to break down into a few sections to kind of make it easier for you to digest. And so here it is. Here's the breakdown. Main subject, as I said, is profitability in the gaming industry. What is that? What does it involve? What does it entail? That's what I'm going to split into 4 main sections. Industry data, business models, development costs, and just how to go about making games profitable, right? What goes into it. Real quick, I will go into the meat of it in each section. So right now, I'm just going to give you a quick preview of what each is. In the industry data section, I'm going to split it mostly between revenue and wages. In revenue, I'm going to talk about the market worth of the industry. I'm going to talk about revenue sources, average profitability of most, publisher and development studios. I'm going to also mention most profitable companies and least profitable companies, just to keep it quick and dirty. Wages is going to be a lot simpler. It's going to be split between C-suite wages, your executives, your CIOs, your COOs, your CFOs, and what have you, and also employee wages and, different job positions and what they make per year on average and all that. And just so you can have a breakdown of the industry as a whole, what it's worth, the kind of money flow that goes into it, and what kind of pie division there is, who gets what slice out of it, right? And that'll be industry data. Then I'll move on to business models. I'm going to list you the most common business models used in the industry as a whole. I'm going to talk about game store platforms independent of that and, what each one of those entails just at a high level. And I'm also going to talk about advertising in its own section because that needs its own whole other section. I mean, advertising is an industry in itself and it has its own niche position in the gaming industry that kind of grows its dirty, awful little tentacles into everything. If you're a gamer of any kind or a developer of any kind, I don't need to explain how horrible that is. But hey, moving on. That's a whole lot of the video. Anyway, next section will be development costs. I'm going to break down development costs for AAA studios, AAA developers, and indie developers separately. This way you get a pretty good idea of just the difference in scale when it comes to the amount of money that is involved in each of these. This will help you, when you look at video games that are being released, then you hear indie develop a game, you see a game, you're going to have an idea of just roughly the scale of money that went into developing that game. After I establish those 2 things, I'm going to talk about the cost breakdown. How much money goes into each aspect of the development process. How much does production cost? How much does software and services cost? Staff costs, R&D, QA, and all that stuff. So you at least have an idea of where that money is going or where it needs to go, or at least the different areas of the development process, and how much that contributes to that total cost, right? Because cost is not just money. It's also time. It's also work. It's also people, and so on and so forth. So I'll go and break it all down for you on that section. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how to go about making a game profitable, whether it's your game that you're developing, that great idea that you've had in your head for years and never had the courage to actually execute it on, or it's something, maybe it's a project you're working on right now, or maybe just you're just a gamer or a client or a random person that's just curious as to, how do people go about making a game profitable, making money off of a game? What the heck does that mean? This is the section where I'm going to go into that. I'm going to be talking about common best practices and recommendations, as how picking your own business model, what options you have within that, the pros and cons in that, picking an audience, working on your game's visibility and the marketing, things like that, and especially traps and don'ts, things to watch out for and avoid like the plague. I don't care if you're AAA or indie. You're all vulnerable to the same mistakes, and they will all cost you the same at the end of the road. It could cost you the game. It could cost you your entire studio, your entire viability in the industry as a whole. Or it could make you the next billionaire. It's a crapshoot, really. But again, I'll go into those details in that section. So strap on your seatbelt, and let's see where this video takes us, shall we? All right, so you already got a breakdown on what the video is going to be about. First things first, I want to start with information about the gaming industry in general, like in terms of revenue and profitability and things like that. It'll help understand this video a lot more if you have a background, a very solid background on exactly the kind of numbers we're dealing with here. It'll really help you get a perspective on just what it takes to make money and how feasible it is, and what the process needs to be in order to get there. What to expect. That's the word. It's better to know what to expect. So first things first, you need to understand the market worth of the gaming industry as a whole. We're talking about, at least in the investigations that I made, roughly the gaming industry is worth about $178.37 billion. I'll repeat that. $178.37 billion with a B dollars, American dollars. That is the market worth of the gaming industry as a whole, give or take a couple billion. That's huge numbers. And you write it down, do what you need to do. Let that marinate for a little while, and just grasp at what we're actually looking at. Because if you're thinking about making games and making money off of that, that's what you're looking at as far as market worth. To further break that down and understand it, you need to understand what the revenue sources are and what the average profitability is for most game developers and publishers and whatnot. So to get a better grasp of this, there's generally five revenue sources, five popular revenue sources. They're not the end all be all. There are other ways to make money off of video games, yes, but the main sources are five. And those are game sales, which is the most obvious one. In-game purchases, aka microtransactions, though those two terms are not exactly the same. But at the end of the day, it's purchases you make within the game itself. Then there's subscriptions, paying a monthly fee or what have you to access the game and some or all of the features. Advertising speaks for itself. That's just commercials, ads, and stuff that you get in games. Advertising.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Advertising. Yes, I know I'm repeating myself. It's on purpose. It's just to give you an idea of just how much advertising there is in the freaking gaming industry. Drives me freaking insane sometimes. Sorry, I digress. Moving on. And then there's esports, which is the most recent addition to these revenue sources. That does not involve making the video games themselves. It's more about organizing competitions on popular game genres and popular game players and teams, much like we see in the sports industry as a whole, like with football, basketball, and all that stuff. Yes, people bet on these things. Yes, these players get paid upwards of $100,000 or more, maybe even $1 million, depending on the league or what have you. Yeah, there's ways to make money off of video games other than just making them. But I digress. Again, I digress. Most of the people that ask me to make this video want to know how to make money making video games. But still, got to put that out there because you need to understand where all the money is going. And then lastly, on this, average profitability. So out of that $178.37 billion industry and all those revenue sources, you have an average of between 15 to 30% profit margin for video game development companies. That's development, okay? Not publishing, not esports, not advertising, game development. So the average game development company, whether they're an indie studio or a AAA studio, they expect to make, you can realistically expect to make anywhere between a 15 to 30% profit margin. So if you've got a video game that is worth $30, expect to make about 15 to 30% of that as profit after covering costs and everything. And this is where game pricing is made the way it's made. This is how a lot of these companies and studios calculate the cost of a game. The insane rise in video game costs, retail costs, is a direct reflection of most of these big companies, especially with the big companies, looking at the numbers of how much it costs to make the game and thinking about how much they need to, quote unquote, or want to make in profits off of it. So they tack on that 15 to 30% on top of whatever it is that costs them, or whatever math they're using to calculate how much it costs them. Yes, there's a lot of gray in there. I'm saying that on purpose. There's a lot of dirty stuff I'm not going to go into in this video about, just putting it out there so you know, to get to those price points of $50, $60, $70, what have you, right? We can get into all the reasons for why games are so expensive and all that stuff in another video, but need to put that out there. That's the profit margin. Then you get down to the average income of a video game development studio business owner specifically. And that can range anywhere between a measly 50,000 American dollars to upwards of several million a year. It is very varied. It's a very wide margin, a very huge spectrum there. But yeah, that's what we're looking at. You have a $178.37 billion industry with 5 main sources of revenue being game sales, in-game purchases, subscriptions, advertising, and esports. Split between all of those, you have a profit margin for development studios that goes anywhere between 15 and 30%, and owners of those development studios can make anywhere between $50,000 to several $1 million a year, depending on their success. So there you have a quick breakdown on the values and targets that we're talking about here. Coming up through the next thing I'm going to talk about is revenue. And how do you get those profits? Well, we're going to go that in a sec. All right. So now we got a pretty rough idea of what the market worth of the industry is, right? $178.37 billion. Yeah, I know I'm repeating myself, but that number is so freaking huge. Gotta make sure you guys remember it. So, how much of money of that goes where, right? Well, let's start with a list of the most profitable companies in the gaming industry. Rough breakdown. I found, at least in my search, this group of, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 companies that make the biggest impact. First in that list, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard of it, is Tencent. Then we have Sony Interactive Entertainment, Microsoft Gaming, we have Apple, we have NetEase Games, Electronic Arts, and Nintendo. If any of you play any kind of games at all, you've heard of at least one of these. Probably all of these. But yeah, definitely have heard of a few of these. If you haven't heard of any of these companies before and you play video games, Wow. I'm impressed. That's all I can say about it. Seriously. But anyway, so what numbers are we looking at? Well, the numbers I have here are mostly for the 2022 and 2023 years, first quarter, things like that. I'm not going to go into too many specifics. This is stuff that you can look up. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I'll give you some rough numbers. In 2022, Tencent generated roughly $32.2 billion. Yeah. First quarter 23, they made 15 of 2023. Then we got Sony Interactive. Sony Interactive, they made, in 2022, they made about $18.2 billion and $8 billion in the first quarter of 2023, give or take. I think that's first quarter, H1, but yeah, I got to double check those numbers. Microsoft Gaming in 2022, they made $12.9 billion. You know what? Let's just stick with 2022. It's more accurate. Apple in 2022 made $15.3 billion. Then we go into NetEase, $7.9 billion in third quarter of 2023. And Electronic Arts, 2022, they made $7.4 billion. And Nintendo made $13.9 billion in 2022. That's a lot of billions. Yeah. Those are the numbers I was able to reliably find. If you want more accurate info, I encourage you go out there and find industry statistical data from reliable sources. I'm going to put a few of those in the links below. So don't worry about that. That's a good starting point, but do your own research. Do look for multiple sources. I cannot emphasize that enough. But there you have it. Those are the most profitable companies in the gaming industry, roughly, and what they make, give or take. Anywhere between $7 and $20 billion a year. Again, that's billion with a freaking B, okay? I don't know how much longer I can keep myself from cussing on this video, but I'm going to try. I swear to God.
I just wanted to run that by you.
1, 2, 3.
So should I continue
It's
with that?
really important that you let me get to 10.
So, most profitable companies. Inevitably, you will ask, well, what are the least profitable companies? Well, we don't actually, I couldn't find an actual list. I wanted to find a list to give you guys an idea, but I did find some general info to give a rough image of how it compares. The least profitable companies? Well, there was a report by Video Game Insights where in 2021, out of the games released in 2021, 20% of those games, 27% of those games sold under 100 units. So less than 100 units. Those games were often developed by teams that were, composed of about 1 to 3 developers, so less than a handful. And they were typically self-published. They were poor quality, despite the large number of games released. Most of them were poor quality. They were small and mostly hobby projects. They had very, very short development times. And if I use my experience as a game developer, I am pretty sure most of them were done by first-time developers that don't understand the process, don't or didn't have access to the proper skill sets or the tools, or even the knowledge of how to use them properly, and we're just experimenting, right? There's nothing wrong with this, but just this is the closest we can get as a floor level of profitability for a game. If you go at it without the proper resources or experience or the right personnel or the right development time, or don't dedicate the right amount of time to it, et cetera, don't give it enough polish, that's the floor. Less than 100 units. Let's say an indie game is anywhere between $15 and $30. Remember that profit margin of 15 to 30% I spoke about earlier? Well, think about only selling 70 units, 70 sales for the whole year on that. You're not going to make a profit. That's going to go into the negatives very quickly. And for most of these tiny little aspiring studios, it's a death sentence. it is a very, very heavy wake-up call to how easy it is to fail if you don't know what you're getting into. So there you have it. From $7 to $15 billion a year to negatives. Again, a huge margin, right? A huge spectrum of success that we're looking at here in terms of profit numbers. Kind of crazy, isn't it? If any of you were drinking before we started watching this video, you're probably sobering up very quick by now. And good. Again, I'm trying to keep this section as short as possible. But then the last bit that I need to talk about in terms of this for this section is, well, out of those profits, if you're making profits, how much is going to who? Wages. I split this up between C-suite and employee wages. So let's get into that now. All right. So already we've covered the general information about the gaming industry as a whole in terms of revenue, market value, and what have you, right? Sources of revenue, those amounts, percentage of expected profitability by most studios, etc. Most profitable companies, least profitable. You get the drift. So now we're moving on to the next part. Now we're going to talk about wages in the gaming industry. I'm splitting this up into two: C-suite wages and employee wages. I want to make the distinction of the wages that executives make versus employees of companies. Now, when I'm talking to executives, keep in mind I'm referring to executive positions mostly in AAA large production companies type thing, companies that hire hundreds if not thousands of employees to work on their games and what have you. Why? I mean, indie studios have these positions as well, don't they? Yes, they do. But most of the time, indie studios are very, very small, under 50 people, easy. Sometimes even mostly like upwards of 10, 20 people at most. And so these positions, even though they're there, the people that have these positions are actually the same people that are doing the actual jobs, the employee jobs. And they're not making the big figures. They don't have massive IPOs, or they don't have investors or what have you. So you can't really compare it. Companies that have these actual positions, the scale of wages is very different for executive suite, right? So C-suite. So keep that in mind as we go along. So starting with C-suite wages. For those of you who have never heard the term C-suite, it's referring to chief officer, like the top leadership of a company. The executive officer, CEO, the CFO, financial officer, the CHO, the CHRO, the human resources officer. These are the people who run the company that make the final decisions. Any kind of decision regarding, in this case, a particular game's direction, the roadmap, decisions to decisions of end of life or end of support or continuation, sequels, all of that. Buck stops here. These are the people who make the final decision, regardless of whatever else anybody else said. So at the end of the day, if something good happens with your favorite video game or something bad happens, these are the people to thank and or blame as necessary. That being said, let's get to it. We'll start with the chief executive officer. I'm going to round up the numbers a little bit just for ease of flow. As chief executive officer typically earns somewhere around $750,000 a year. Yeah, $750,000. I'll let that marinate for a second. Chief executive officer, $750,000 a year, $750,000. So, following that, we have the chief operating officer, sitting at around $450,000 a year. That's still $500,000 almost. Chief financial officer is next at around $360,000 a year. That's more than $250,000. Chief legal officer, $330,000 give or take. Then we have chief information technology officer, or CITO, at $265,000 give or take. Chief revenue officer, that's $255,000. Chief human resources officer is $250,000. Now we're at the low end, $250,000. Chief technology officer, And chief marketing officers make about the same, around 230,000, give or take. And then finally, the chief information security officer, which should be getting paid more than most of these guys because of how important their job is, $215,000 a year. So even thinking at the bottom end of all of this, the bottom end, we don't have a single position here that pays much less than $250,000 a year. This is the kind of revenue you can expect to make if you ever make it to C-suite in the gaming industry. You know, AAA pays well at these positions. Now, for comparison, we're moving on to employee wages. These are the people getting their hands dirty, quote unquote. These are the guys that actually make games real. They're the ones who are putting in the design work, the artwork, the programming work, the engineering, testing, everything that goes into actually making the game. These are not leadership positions. These are the positions of work. Leaders are absolutely useless without these guys. And I am making this a bit of a tangent comment here because I want everybody to understand the difference between C-suite and employees. I'm not trying to start a fight here. I am trying to make a reality very, very clear. Okay? C-suite makes the decisions. They run the company. That's important in itself. The employees are the ones that make the games. Okay? The people making the games are not the people making the decisions, usually. Keep that in mind. That tangent aside, we're going back. We're talking wages, right? So we'll start with the video game designer. The top of the heap, well, close to the top of the heap. $90,000 a year on average. Again, this depends on the country and what have you, and most of these numbers are based off of United States currency, obviously, so keep that in mind. But roughly $90,000 a year, we got the video game designer. Then we got the video game producer, that's usually my role, at $80,000 a year when you get paid. Not getting paid anymore. You got video game artists sitting at around $75,000 a year. You got the video game programmers, who are the highest paid of this group, at about $105,000 a year, if you get a good position at a high-paying place. Then we have the video game tester getting paid a lovely, roughly $55,000 a year, give or take, 50 to 55,000, barely livable. If you can even keep it, not livable. None of these are livable. Video game sound designer, $75,000 a year. Video game animator, $75,000 a year. So on the employee side of things, everybody except one is paid under $100,000 a year. The only exception being the video game programmer, without them, there really is no video game. Getting paid $105,000 a year. And at the very bottom, we got the testers, without whom you couldn't really truly release a game. Let's be honest. Getting paid a measly $50,000 to $55,000 a year. So to put this into context, in most places, none of these would be a livable wage. Not with the current, inflation and cost of living across the nation, stuff like that. You'd have to live in a place deep in the countryside where property values and all that stuff, cost of living is really, really low, but be hired by somebody in a metropolitan area somewhere in a big city where there's bigger wages so that you can offset it. But let's face it, the whole remote work thing hasn't really sunk in very well yet. And most of these companies, they won't pay you if you're not in the city where they are at, right? So that I need to put that in there to have some perspective. So at the end, in conclusion of all of this, you have C-suite wages that pay between roughly $250,000 to $750,000 a year per position. And then you have employee wages where most employees are getting paid $100K or less, mostly less than $100K a year for all the work they do. And they're usually the ones doing 60 to 80-hour work weeks, nonstop work with high demand, shorthanded, and with a unmanageable workload and unrealistic expectations, and oftentimes having to deal with bad project leadership that's constantly shifting things around and making 2-3 times the work that needs to be done. And I'm just being very general and summarizing it because I don't want to digress too much in here. But I wanted to put it in that context so that everybody's fairly aware of where the money's going here. I did not include investors here. The investors are not part of wages, to be honest. And that would require a whole other YouTube video to explain that, because the way the investor thing works is very different. It varies by state, and there's many different types, and that's its own discussion. But a lot of the rest of the money goes there. At the end of the day, what you need to understand is that with these major companies, the vast majority of the revenue, the money that the company pulls in, is being poured into C-suite and investors. Very, very small portion goes to the actual employees and costs of production and what have you. I don't care what else they tell you. There is a huge discrepancy in these two levels of wages, especially considering the amount of work they're requiring their employees to do and what have you, conditions, the kind of revenue they're pulling in. You saw the market details that I talked about earlier. You know how much money there is in that industry. You know how much revenue is flying around. You know how many different sources of revenue they have. And this is how they spread their wealth within the company. I'm not going to say one thing or another. I'll let you guys arrive at your own conclusions on that. You can always ping me for discussion during one of my streams or on my Discord if you want to discuss it further. But I wanted you guys to see the gap. There it is. Do not rage. Killing's bad. It's against the law. Do not rage. Sorry, some of these things are kind of hard to not let them get to you, especially considering recent events. So there you have it. The gaming industry as a whole, from market value to revenue sources to revenue expectations and percentages, all the way to wages, C-suite and employee-wise. Now you have a good rough idea of how much money is moving around in the industry, where it's going, and where the gaps lie. Now that we have that perspective in mind, we can move on to the next section. And now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of profitability with video games. How to make your games profitable? Well, we have to start by understanding business models, right? So in the next section, that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the business models, what the most common ones are, and a couple of examples of these models and what you can expect from each and how they work, right? So we'll get to that in a second. All right, so we covered the industry data, wages, revenue, and all that stuff. I'm going to take a little moment here to apologize for being so damn somber and depressing throughout that. But I was telling my audience earlier, it was on purpose. I want to keep these videos lighthearted, but at the same time, that needed to be somber and serious.
You serious?
I wanted you guys to understand the gaps, the spread of wealth and revenue in the industry, to kind of give perspective to everything else I'm going to talk about here. You guys need to know. You need to know where the money's going, who's getting paid how much and for what. And that's why the tone is so dark. Hopefully, it can be a little more lighthearted going forward. So next section, like I said before, is going to be the most common business models in the gaming industry. Once you understand this, then you can start having an idea of the kind of avenues and roadmaps you can have in order to plan some profitability in whatever game you're making or somebody else is making. If you do not understand the business models, there's no freaking way you can consistently make money, right? That's the rough idea. So I'm going to cover it in 3 sections. The business models, we'll start with a list of just that, the most common models. After that, I'm going to talk about game store platforms. And then finally, I'm going to be discussing advertising. Yes, I'm dedicating a whole section to advertising. the most obnoxious aspect of making revenue in the gaming industry or in any industry you can imagine. Advertising is the thing that we cannot get away from anymore. It is the creepy stalker ex-girlfriend of the freaking every industry.
Sweetie, where are you?
Not here. I'm with someone nicer that's not possessive.
Actually, now that I think about it, it is so freaking annoying and we want to get rid of it. But unfortunately, everybody is just so toxically addicted and convinced that they need it that they just can't get rid of it. It's like, oh, you just have to accept it. She's there. She's staring at you and she's creepy, or he is creepy, depending on who you're talking to. Yes, advertising. Yes, I'm dwelling on it on purpose because I want to emphasize how much I despise it. But it is a part of it. And if you don't understand advertising, you're not going to be very profitable. There's a way to make it work for you. And we'll get to that. But yes, common business models, game store platforms, and advertising. Take a deep breath, strap on again, and let's begin. All right, so business models. We're starting with the most common business models, like I mentioned earlier. And there's a bit of a list, so bear with me here. We're going to start at the top with game engines. What are game engines? A game engine is basically the laws of physics for any particular game. It is what decides how everything in the game works, and how everything works, how it operates, and what is allowed and not.
This next test applies the principles of momentum to movement through portals. If the laws of physics no longer apply in the future, God help you.
Right? So how do companies make money off of game engines? Well, take a look at Unreal and Unity. These are two of the most common game engines out there. And they're often sold to aspiring developers or big developer studios or what have you, so that they can create their own games without having to spend more than $1 million in their own in-house game engine, which is how it used to be. Epic Games, they make their own games, true, and they are the ones that develop the Unreal Engine. So basically what they did is they took the old model of making an in-house engine to develop your own games, and they said, wait a minute, we can make money off of our games, and we can make money by, selling access to our game engine to other people that want to make their own games. And we take credit for that. And there it is. Unity, on the other hand, doesn't make their own games. They just make the software development kit, SDK, or the game engine itself, and they provide it to developers to make their own games. And so they only make money off of the game engine, not also their own games. So there it is, game engines. Next up is publishing houses, or publishers for short. We know these guys. Activision Blizzard, Electronic Arts, or EA, Ubisoft, Microsoft, Sony Entertainment. These are all major publishing houses. They tend to be large companies that focus on publishing video games made by in-house or third-party developers. Oftentimes, you'll see a very popular game made by a particular developer, and you'll see a big sticker saying either Microsoft or Sony or whatever, because that's the company under which they operate to be able to get the resources and capital and what have you, and personnel necessary to develop the game that they want to develop. And so it's more like an umbrella company type relationship, right? And so publishing houses make money by bringing in these developers to make video games that then they sell under their house. And so there it is. That's how that business model works. Following that, we get the subscription model. The veritable, you gotta be a member to enjoy. You can call it the, I don't know, what's the word for this? Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. I have these moments sometimes. I'm too young to have Alzheimer's, so it kind of worries me.
Always keep an eye out for Johnny the tackling Alzheimer's patient.
What's that supposed to mean?
Who am I?
The country club model. Yeah, there we go. So, country club model. You have to pay to be a member. You're not a member, you don't get to play. That's the subscription model, essentially. This was made popular by MMOs, or massively multiplayer online games, like World of Warcraft. It's still one of those games where you actually have to pay a monthly fee to play the game, right? This has evolved quite a bit, and depending on who you talk to, but the more popular model for this is paying a monthly fee or a yearly fee to access an entire platform, be it Sony's PlayStation library or Ubisoft's game library or Electronic Arts and what have you. Again, monthly or yearly fee in order to be able to play. Then there's buy to play. This is the old school model. I pay you a certain price, you give me a copy of the game. Pretty straightforward. Give me money, I give you game. Then we have free to play. Yeah, no, play, go ahead. Download it, you can access it, you can play most or if not all of the game for free, not having to pay a cent out of your pocket. That is usually just a core model that has other business models tied into it in order to generate regular revenue. And I'm going to go into those, starting with DLCs, add-ons, and expansions. DLCs short for downloadable content. Downloadable content, DLC, right? And so oftentimes these are inserted into free-to-play games, or sometimes even pay-to-play or buy-to-play games, where you can pay for additional content, whether it's equipment, resources for the game, additional maps, additional storyline, what have you, right? There's more content in the game that you pay more money to get more, right? Then you have microtransactions, which is kind of similar to add-ons, expansions, and DLCs, but they're a lot smaller in scope. They usually have very little utility other than convenience, say a percentage bonus on experience, or a little more in-game currency here, or maybe a time saver where you don't have to spend as much time unlocking XYZ. It'll unlock certain things for you without you having to play through it. That's the more typical element of microtransactions. And they tend to be very controversial, and a lot of people don't like saying them because it feels like a four-letter word.
Shit! Language!
More on that on a different video. And then finally, we have pay to download. This is the most common business model out there. And again, a lot of these are used in combination with each other. But the core of pay to download, which according to a 2023 survey, we found out that 50% of game developers use this model, is where you pay to download a digital copy of the game and install it on your computer or on your console to be able to play. It is digital. So if you delete it, it's not completely gone. You can always download it later since you already paid to have access to a copy of it. And there you have it. Those are the most common business models used in the gaming industry. Oftentimes, like I said, there's a combination of these. Sometimes you'll have a particular developer combine all of these in one way, shape, or another, with rare exception. So there are myriad ways to combine these in order to generate money for a game. So there's untold avenues for people to make money off of this. Are they implemented well? And for the most part, again, that's for another video. Do not get me started on that. I finally calmed down after a freaking rage-filled rant earlier this morning, and I don't want to start another one. Please, for my sanity. Okay? All right. Well, now that we covered that, we can move on to the next section, which is game store platforms. I'm going to talk about average revenue there and the three major players there, the trifecta known as Steam, Epic, and GOG. All right. So now that we've already talked about the most common business models, it's time to talk about the storefronts, where to sell your game. I mean, it's one thing to know, what method you're going to use to make money. It's another thing to know where you're going to sell it and how things work there. So we're going to go over real quick. We're going to go over what I call the big three. That's Steam, Epic, and GOG, also known as Good Old Games. I'm just going to give a quick breakdown of 4 main points. Their average revenue for per year. I'm going to mostly focus on the most recent year, 2023. What percentage they take from developers in fees or what have you. What percentage the developer gets to keep. That would be you, if you're the one making the game. And any other kind of fees that they charge to be able to sell on their platform. So we'll start with the big one in the scene, the massive behemoth known as Steam. We love it. Yes, we love them. Do they annoy us sometimes? Sure. There are things, some people get annoyed sometimes with things they do. Do some people hate them? Sure, I'm pretty sure. There's haters there everywhere. But none can argue that they are the most popular storefront and gaming platform out there. Now, average revenue right off the bat for 2023, and I hope you're sitting down, is $13 billion USD, United States dollar.
What? What the fuck?
I'm going to let them marinate there for a bit. 13 billion. Like other big numbers I mentioned in this video. Yes, that's billion with a B, A, B, C, B, second letter in the alphabet, billion. Not million, not mama million, no, billion, 13. Now do keep in mind, Steam is owned by Valve. Valve, look, I'll let you guys do your own research on this. Look at Valve, look at the size of the company, look at the amount of employees, C-suite executives and what have you. And then compare that to the amount of money they make per year. Like if I go as far back as 2019, that was $4.5 billion in 2019, and it grew to 13 billion in 2023. That's an amazing amount of zeros, 9 zeros, if memory serves correct, and a lovely 13 right next to them. Considering that they don't have massive buildings or like overhead costs or anything like that, that's a hefty profit. I say that for perspective, not as a criticism. I actually like a lot of the things Valve does, and we can discuss that later as to why I like them. But that is a shit ton of profit, right? I say this for perspective because we're going to come up with the next part. The percentage they charge per game, the fee they charge per game sale on their platform. And that comes to a 30% fee. So yeah, for every game you sell in or on the Steam platform or DLC, whatever, it doesn't matter. Every sale, 30% Valve gets to keep. That's a pretty hefty chunk. If you sell only 100 units of a $5 game, 30% of every single one of those $5 goes to Steam. Now, they have a little bit of a caveat where if you sell more than over $10 million worth in one given year, you get an extra 5%. So it turns into a 25-75 instead of a 30-70 split. Obviously, the percentage the developer keeps ends up being 70% on average, unless you get that 5% bonus, which means you keep 75% and then Valve keeps only 25. That's the biggest incentive there that they have for good sales. But still, $10 million is a hell of a high bar for most indie developers, most of all indie developers, unless you get like a one-trick pony or like a rare unicorn that just blows up out of nowhere. Like, what is it? Among Us. That's a good example. Started $5 game. It was a good secret for quite a few years, and then COVID happens. People discover it, and holy Moses, they sell a lot. And now there's even a VR version of it, plus toys and a whole line of accessories and what have you. So you get the idea, right? Finally, the platform fees. Steam actually charges $100 a year to be able to sell your game on Steam. So do keep that in mind as well. This is your range of profitability on Steam is anywhere between 70-75% for every sale, depending on whether you break 10 million or not. And then there's a $100 fee every year just to be on the storefront. So, things to keep in mind when considering how much you can make there. Still, $13 billion platform. You could get lost in the sea of games, but the potential for profitability is definitely there. Epic. Now we're going to the next big storefront. Epic Games. They have their own Epic Game Store. Average revenue for them during 2023 was about 285 million for the year. A considerably lower amount than 13 billion if you really look at it. Still, it's a good chunk. The percentage they charge per game sale or DLC sale there is a 12% fee. That's less than half of what Steam charges. This comes from a bit of a crusade that Epic has against mainly Apple and Google, and by association Steam, on this whole 30% fee thing. The CEO of Epic is an avid believer in allowing developers to keep a considerable chunk of the revenue because they're the ones that made the game, and he considers 30% of every sale a bit excessive. And again, here comes the perspective I gave you on Steam and their fees. They're making 13 billion, and they're still charging every developer 30% per sale of their game. Why?
Why? Why? Oh, that's why.
That's a bit much, man. $13 billion is a whole lot of money for the size of your company and the amount of employees you got. You better be paying those employees a huge chunk of that, to even get close to possibly justifying it. But anyway, tangent aside, 12% fee for all store purchases that you benefit from. Then we go into percentage you keep for every sale. That's 88%, obviously. However, if developers make their games exclusive to the platform for the first 6 months, they'll get 100% of the revenue. And this is the other way that Epic Games is trying to give more support to the developers. If a developer is willing to make their game exclusive to Epic Games for the first half year, they get to keep 100% of the revenue. Very important to consider this, especially if you're an indie developer. You may think that this is tailored mostly to major AAA development studios and publishers. Sure, on its face, it might look like that. I think it's the opposite. This is more tailored towards indie developers who are far less likely to make the kind of revenue that a AAA game can benefit from. A AAA game from a famous or popular publisher / developer can easily make millions and millions and millions within the first month on selling a game if they do things the right way. Big caveat there. So they could really maximize their profits if they sell only on Epic, but then you get into that whole how many of our players and clients are on other platforms. Doesn't necessarily make sense. You would actually be hurting yourself more in terms of profit than not. An indie developer who's completely unknown, on the contrary, they could go on Epic, keep 100% of whatever they make over the first half year, use it as a way to focus their revenue. Focus their marketing and all that stuff and their visibility on one platform where it might be easier to be noticed. And then once it takes off, or even if it doesn't, they can then expand to other platforms to make more revenue and get more visibility and what have you. It's an excellent idea. Something to consider. If you're thinking of making a game and selling it, consider, even if you plan to put your game on all the platforms eventually, consider an offer like this. This is very important to know. Because then that first year, if you hit it well enough, let's say you don't explode in popularity like Among Us did, but you get a good bit of visibility and a good number of people buying your game. If you get to keep 100% of all of that, that's huge for an indie developer. That's huge. 6 months of 100%, it is very well worth the risk, very, very well worth considering. So this is something for you to think about in terms of what you're planning for your game and how much you expect to make and things like that. Keep that in mind. Finally, platform fees. As far as I was able to investigate, I could not find any kind of platform fees that Epic charges aside from the percentage that they take. I tried to find more information. I couldn't. I think this is an internal thing mostly. They didn't mention any fees, so I'm going to presume it's free based on the information I was able to find or not find, depending on how you look at it. Finally, we got GOG. Good Old Games. They should be well known because the owners are none other than CD Projekt Red, the developers of The Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077, and those are pretty famous on their own. Their average revenue for the last 5 years, on average, is about a 1.2 million, a lot lower than even Epic, right? Why? It's not because they're bad. It's because mostly GOG, Good Old Games, as their name implies, focuses on legacy games that are no longer playable on modern platforms. they go back and they refurbish and they modify them in a way so that they can allow you to play them in modern operating systems and hardware. We're talking about games that go all the way back to the 80s. Games I grew up with, that games I still have, but that I cannot play as they are because the operating systems just don't support them, right? So they sell for a lot less than the average game, hence the revenue is a lot lower. Like Steam, they take 30%, a 30% cut per sale, and the developer gets to keep 70%. No major incentives outside of that. There is one incentive that is not fairly clear. It's not monetary related, and that is the fact that GOG does not put DRM on the games that's sold on their platform. You do not need a client to run games that you buy through GOG. You just download them from the website. You can get their platform. You don't have to. You download them from their website. You install them. You run them. Whatever version of whatever patch version you want of that particular game. That is another thing to consider, because a lot of people refuse to engage with Epic or Steam runs because of the whole DRM thing. Again, it's not a monetary thing, but it is worth considering as a developer based on the kind of crowd you want to sell to. If you sell on GOG, you are saying you're okay without DRM on your particular game. This is why, even though you find AAA games on GOG recently, there are some you will not find there because they refuse to sell their game without DRM. Right? Big thing to consider. Finally, platform fees, same as Epic. It's free. I did not find any mention of any other additional platform fees like the yearly fee that Steam has. So we're going to go on free for now. I could not find any other information stating otherwise. And with that, there you have it. The big trifecta, the big three, Steam, Epic, and GOG. Those are your major markets and platforms on which to sell your games, obviously digitally. Selling physically is a whole other game, and it's something that's going away in popularity lately for many, many reasons. And to be honest, it's only really truly viable or beneficial for big AAA titles that do collector's editions and things like that. But that's a subject for a different discussion. Now that we covered that, the next part that we'll discuss in a minute would be the wonderful thing, the wonderful elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but out of common decency and courtesy, I know better than to not offer it at least a cup of tea or coffee, and that is advertising.
Boy, here we go.
Yeah, strap on. We're going to deal and talk about advertising. You need to know about this. If you're going to sell a video game, you're unfortunately going to have to deal with advertising one level or another. So let me give you the details on this, and then you can decide. So we covered our storefronts, right? You know about the big trifecta, Steam, Epic, and GOG. How much they make, how much they take from you, how much you get to keep. Very important knowledge. Now we're moving on, like I said, to my... I'm not even going to go there. I've hit it on it. Yes, advertising. We're going to talk about advertising. So let's hold our breath and get through this as quickly as possible, shall we?
Do it! Just do it!
I'm going to talk about three main points. First of all, average advertising revenue per platform, right? Next up, we're going to be talking about the most common advertising platforms on the industry. And we're going to wrap up with the most common advertising models used. So to start off, we have three main platforms I'm going to cover: mobile games, console games, and PC games. In mobile games, and this is for this year so far, as far as this video that I'm recording is 2024, US mobile game ad revenues were forecasted to reach $7.74 billion, which is a 13% to year on year. And for reference, total game ad revenues will be 8.53 billion, meaning mobile game advertising makes up 90.7% of gaming revenues.
Damn!
Again, one of these pauses I feel obligated to give you guys, in case you're not sitting down, in case you need to do a double take. Let me repeat that. Forecasted game ad revenues are 7.74 billion, 13% increase year on year. Total game ad revenues will be 8.53 billion. Yes, both are billion. Again, I keep, this is a running theme here. Billion with a B, not million with an M.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
And it makes mobile game advertising anyway, on top of all of that, makes up 90.7% of gaming revenues. Ask me why I hate publishing on the mobile market. This is where my indie studio, Locked Door Studios, started. We started by trying to make mobile video games. It was a very important lesson, and we learned a lot from it. It was a good yet painful experience, and I'm willing to talk about it any other time. Yes, you want to make money in the mobile game, in the mobile market, in the mobile platform. Advertising is probably the only guaranteed way, and it's not pretty. Console games. Revenue for console games in advertising was about $53 billion in 2023. 53 billion. That's 2.5 times almost, I think, what freaking Steam made in profits for that year. And then we have PC games, which the advertising revenue for PC games was 38 billion in 2023. I'm sorry, it's advertising. They don't suffer anywhere near as much as a developer does with making video games, and yet they're making exponential multiples more in revenue than all of them combined. It is insane. But it is what it is. We need to know this. So moving on. Those are the averages in terms of revenue by platform for advertising. So, which are the most, popular advertising platforms in the gaming industry? Well, again, I divided this into 3 main ones: in-game advertising, social media platforms, and ad networks. For those of you who are not clear on this, in-game advertising is the integration of marketing tools or marketing content into the gaming environment, aka the game itself. So it could be a subtle product placement here or there, a little ad pops up or what have you, or a full-fledged advertising, which is the whole full page and animation, the whole video, prompt with previews and whatnot, like you see on the web and on YouTube videos out there. There are many other different ways to implement it, but the long story short, it's basically advertising that exists within the game application itself, usually through an integrated platform that pops up the ads given certain conditions. The next up is social media platforms. This is one where most of you are exposed to it. That includes Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever it is you're using. They have the occasional advertising post that comes up, and you get your advertising through that. And then finally, we have ad networks, which kind of tie into the other two, especially the in-game advertising. Ad networks provide the tools to do that integration. These can include I'll give you a quick list from the ones from 2024. The push.house is one. Media.net is another one. Unity ads. Yes, Unity has its own ad revenue network, which kind of helps for indie developers, especially, so we can avoid dealing too much with third-party stuff. Ad Colony, Chartboost, Vungle, AppLovin, and StartApp. There's a nice little quick short list of some of the more proliferated and popular ad networks out there. And there you have it. Those are the most popular platforms that you're dealing with when it comes to advertising. So if you see an ad on a game or on a social media platform somewhere about video games and what have you, you're probably dealing with one of these 3 main sources from that short list of networks. Finally, there are some common advertising models that exist. And this is a little numerous, but I kept it down to a list of about 6. I'll go over them real quick so you know what they are. The first one is probably the most obvious one, and that's static advertising. So what's static advertising? These are basically ads that are built into the game and cannot be changed without an update. They're just there as is, and they pop up whenever. That's it. Then you have interstitial advertising. This is a full screen ad, right? And it plays during natural pauses within gameplay. Basically, when you're transitioning from one level or to another, or when there's a result screen or after the result screen, they give you a quick boom. It's a little more strategic and dynamic in nature. Speaking of dynamic, the next one is dynamic in-game advertising, which, unlike static ads, they can change based on various factors like, well, maybe the player's location, the time of day, or game progress. So this is a little more creative, and it's actually quite interesting because then you have an ad that is more, in their words, the jargon they like to use, more relevant. Because then the ad you're getting is not so much removed from what you are doing. It's kind of associated in some way. For example, the time of day or the location you're at. Say you're in a Japanese-inspired town, and the ad you get is about something that's related to Japanese culture or the Japanese market or something Japanese in nature, right? Maybe it's a manga advertisement or some accessories from your from something. You get the point, right? It is something relevant. It doesn't look as out of place, or at least that's the intent. Then we got product placement. This is universal for every industry, but how does that show up in the gaming industry? Well, you basically integrate the product itself, be it the brand or some of its attributes, what have you, into the game in a way that feels like it's a natural part of the game setting. So now it's kind of like with the dynamic in-game advertising, but instead of just being related in theme, it is part of the world you're in. It's integrated into the game itself. A quick random example, just to give you a picture of it. Maybe you're going into a store in the game itself, and the store is selling Nikes, like blatantly Nikes with the same logo and the brand and all that stuff. Maybe you can interact with them or something. Maybe your character can buy them and wear them and what have you. But the actual real life product is recreated in the game as part of the game. Which, if you ask me, if you're going to do advertising, that makes more sense. Because then you're not breaking the gaming experience to plaster an ad on somebody, which is what I hate the most about it. So if you're going to go about it, this would be the way I would prefer to go about it. But, that has its own caveats and its own discussion because, it can be controversial. It'll turn people off and things like that. But it is, as far as the game development goes, it is a method that if I were to do it, this is how I would do it. That's just my own opinion. You weigh it for your project as it best fits. Moving on, we have sponsored content or events. This is another very popular one, especially with the advent of esports. You can have brands that can sponsor special game content, such as levels, missions, in-game events. I would add to that also accessories that you can sell as merch as part of your platform, because a lot of popular games like Destiny or Warframe or what have you, Apex Legends, they have their own apparel that they sell and things like that. It could be something like that. Maybe you can invite a brand to do a collaboration, and you can sell merch that is themed to your game and their brand and things like that. And then you can collaborate to have some themed content around that brand or your own that you include in your own game as like items or levels, missions, what have you. And now finally, the most ubiquitous one and the double-edged sword of the gaming industry right now, and that is free-to-play. We all know free-to-play. You get the game. You just get the game. You can play it. You don't have to pay a premium. But the interesting part of this, and here's how it ties into advertising. Just so you guys know, 85, a whopping 85% of gaming revenue comes from free-to-play games. Let me repeat that. 85% of gaming revenue comes from free-to-play games. The next time you hear anybody, especially some high and mighty executive or whatever, say the free-to-play model is not profitable, you will automatically know they are full of shit and they do not know the industry they're working in. They do not understand their product.
You ever hear the one about the stupid little prick named Rick who thought he knew shit but didn't know shit?
Even the ones that are actually taking part of it and making profit of it, a lot of them don't know anyway, but that's a whole other discussion that is rage-inducing for me, so I won't go into it right now. But still, long story short, 85%. This is the number you need to focus on. 85% of gaming revenue comes from free-to-play games. These games are free up front, like I said. You don't have to put a down payment or a premium of any kind. They generate revenue through, wait for it, ads, in-game transactions, and optional purchases. But more often than not, especially in the mobile gaming industry, you will see free-to-play games that most of the revenue they make is through ads. Just by presenting ads, those games are making money. It is that simple. You put up a game for free. You make a deal with an advertising network. You implement one of those advertising models into that free-to-play game. Do your best to expose it to as many players as possible and sit back and watch the money roll in. I'm going to go do a quick rewind and remind you that average revenue for mobile games, like advertising in mobile games, was expected to reach about $8.5 billion, and it makes up 90% of gaming revenue in the mobile game market. Consoles have made an average $53 billion in revenue in 23, and PC games made another $38 billion in advertising profits in 2023. Fast forward through free-to-play model that makes up 85% of gaming revenue. You're starting to see where the dots connect?
Ack, I got a paper trail to prove it. Check this out. Take a look at this.
Jesus Christ,
That right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day.
Okay. Keep this in mind, because as much as we all hate advertising, we're all going to have to deal with it, unfortunately. This is business. If you're looking to make profits in the gaming industry, you have to understand the business. And right now, probably one of the most hated and most annoying aspects of business is marketing and advertising. And if you're an indie developer, you're going to depend very heavily on these things. It behooves you to study these models that I just gave you, these different platforms, these different tactics, understand them intimately, and make a very, very nuanced approach on how you're going to go about engaging with them. It is possible to make profit without them, but it is very risky and very unlikely. I am personally dealing with this right now, how I'm going to go about this thing. Am I going to put advertising in my games or not? I don't want to. Ideally, I won't. But that depends on a whole other bunch of factors, which we will go over at the end when I start actually guiding you on the best approaches to all of this. In the meantime, we're going to cut it off here as far as business models goes. That's the last bit, advertising. Next up, we're going to be discussing development costs. Very important to understand where your money is going to need to go before you even think of publishing your game and start making money off of it. We're going to go into it, dev cut like AAA. We're going to compare AAA versus indie, and we're going to do a cost breakdown per resource and what have you on every aspect of the game development process, so you have an idea of the kind of money you're going to need up front, if any. So, yes, let's take a quick deep breath, and we'll go and move on.
you're still here. It's over. Go home. Oh, you're expecting a teaser for Deadpool 2. Well, we don't have that kind of money. You expecting Sam Jackson show up with an eye patch and a saucy little leather number? Go.